Pentesting fundamentals. Before teaching you the technical hands-on aspects of ethical hacking, you'll need to understand more about what a penetration tester's job responsibilities are and what processes are followed in performing pen tests finding vulnerabilities in a client's application or system. The importance and relevancy of cybersecurity are ever increasing and can be in every walk of life. News headlines fill our screens, reporting yet another hack or data leak. Cybersecurity is relevant to all people in the modern world, including a strong password policy to protect your emails or to businesses and other organizations needing to protect both devices and data from damages. A penetration test or pentest is an ethically driven attempt to test and analyze the security defenses to protect these assets and pieces of information. A penetration test involves using the same tools, techniques, and methodologies that someone with malicious intent would use and is similar to an audit. According to Security Magazine. Opens in new tab. Cybersecurity Industry Magazine. There are over 2,200 cyber attacks every day, one attack every 39 seconds. Pentesting fundamentals. Learn the battle of legality and ethics in cybersecurity, let alone penetration testing, is always controversial. Labels like hacking and hacker often hold negative connotations, especially in pop culture, thanks to a few bad apples. The idea of legally gaining access to a computer system is a challenging concept to grasp after all. What makes it legal exactly? Recall that a penetration test is an authorized audit of a computer system's security and defenses as agreed by the owners of the systems. The legality of penetration is pretty clear-cut in this sense. Anything that falls outside of this agreement is deemed unauthorized. Before a penetration test starts, a formal discussion occurs between the penetration tester and the system owner. Various tools, techniques, and systems to be tested are agreed on. This discussion forms the scope of the penetration testing agreement and will determine the course the penetration test takes. Companies that provide penetration testing services are held against legal frameworks and industry accreditation. For example, the National Cybersecurity Centre (NCSC) has the check accreditation scheme in the UK. This check means that only check-approved companies can conduct authorized penetration tests of public sector and CNI systems and networks. NCSC. Ethics is the moral debate between right and wrong. Where an action may be legal, it may go against an individual's belief system of right and wrong. Penetration testers will often be faced with potentially morally questionable decisions during a penetration test. For example, they are gaining access to a database and being presented with potentially sensitive data. Or they are, perhaps, performing an attack on an employee to test an organization's human security. If that action has been agreed upon during the initial stages, it is legal, however ethically questionable. Hackers are sorted into three hats, where their ethics and motivations behind their actions determine what hat category they are placed into. Let's cover these three in the table below. Hat category description example. White hat: these hackers are considered the good people. They remain within the law and use their skills to benefit others. For example, a penetration tester performing an authorized engagement on a company. Gray hat: these people use their skills to benefit others often. However, they do not respect/follow the law or ethical standards at all times. For example, someone taking down a scamming site. Black hat: these people are criminals and often seek to damage organizations or gain some form of financial benefit at the cost of others. For example, ransomware authors infect devices with malicious code and hold data for ransom. The is a document that is created at the initial stages of a penetration testing engagement. This document consists of three main sections explained in the table below, which are ultimately responsible for deciding how the engagement is carried out. The SANS Institute has a great example of this document which you can view online. Section description. Permission: this section of the document gives explicit permission for the engagement to be carried out. This permission is essential to legally protect individuals and organizations for the activities they carry out. Test scope: this section of the document will annotate specific targets to which the engagement should apply. For example, the penetration test may only apply to certain servers or applications but not the entire network. Rules: the rules section will define exactly the techniques that are permitted during the engagement. For example, the rules may specifically state that techniques such as attacks are prohibited, but man-in-the-middle attacks are okay. You are given permission to perform a security audit on an organization. What type of hacker would you be? You attack an organization and steal their data. What type of hacker would you be? What document defines how a penetration testing engagement should be carried out? Pentesting fundamentals. Penetration tests can have a wide variety of objectives and targets within scope. Because of this, no penetration test is the same, and there are no one-case-fits-all as to how a penetration tester should approach it. The steps a penetration tester takes during an engagement is known as the methodology. A practical methodology is a smart one, where the steps taken are relevant to the situation at hand. For example, having a methodology that you would use to test the security of a web application is not practical when you have to test the security of a network. Before discussing some different industry standard methodologies, we should note that all of them have a general theme of the following stages. Stage description. Information gathering. This stage involves collecting as much publicly accessible information about a target/organization as possible, for example, and research. Note, this does not involve scanning any systems. Enumeration/scanning. This stage involves discovering applications and services running on the systems. For example, finding a web server that may be potentially vulnerable. Exploitation. This stage involves leveraging vulnerabilities discovered on a system or application. This stage can involve the use of public exploits or exploiting application logic. Privilege escalation. Once you have successfully exploited a system or application known as a foothold, this stage is the attempt to expand your access to a system. You can escalate horizontally and vertically, where horizontally is accessing another account of the same permission group, i.e. another user, whereas vertically is that of another permission group, i.e. an administrator. Post-exploitation. This stage involves a few substages. 1. What other hosts can be targeted? Pivoting. 2. What additional information can we gather from the host now that we are a privileged user? Recovering your tracks. 4. Reporting. Awesome. The Open Source Security Testing Methodology Manual opens a new tab. Provides a detailed framework of testing strategies for systems, software, applications, communications, and the human aspect of cybersecurity. The methodology focuses primarily on how these systems, applications communicate, so it includes a methodology for 1. Telecommunications, phones, though IP, etc. 2. Wired networks. 3. Wireless communications. Advantages, disadvantages. Covers various testing strategies in depth. The framework is difficult to understand, very detailed, and tends to use unique definitions. Includes testing strategies for specific targets, i.e. telecommunications and networking. Intentionally left blank. The framework is flexible depending upon the organization's needs. Intentionally left blank. The framework is meant to set a standard for systems and applications, meaning that a universal methodology can be used in a penetration testing scenario. Intentionally left blank. The Open Web Application Security Project opens a new tab. Framework is a community-driven and frequently updated framework used solely to test the security of web applications and services. The Foundation regularly writes reports. Opens a new tab. Stating the top 10 security vulnerabilities a web application may have, the testing approach, and remediation. Advantages, disadvantages. Easy to pick up and understand. It may not be clear what type of vulnerability a web application has. They can often overlap. Actively maintained and is frequently updated. Does not make suggestions to any specific software development lifecycles. It covers all stages of an engagement, from testing to reporting and remediation. The framework doesn't hold any accreditation such as check. Specializes in web applications and services. Intentionally left blank. Cybersecurity Framework 1.1. The Cybersecurity Framework opens a new tab. Is a popular framework used to improve an organization's cybersecurity standards and manage the risk of cyber threats. This framework is a bit of an honorable mention because of its popularity and detail. The framework provides guidelines on security controls and benchmarks for success for organizations from critical infrastructure power plants, etc., all through to commercial. There is a limited section on a standard guideline for the methodology a penetration tester should take. Advantages, disadvantages. The framework is estimated to be used by 50% of American organizations by 2020. Has many iterations of frameworks, so it may be difficult to decide which one applies to your organization. The framework is extremely detailed in setting standards to help organizations mitigate the threat posed by cyber threats. The framework has weak auditing policies, making it difficult to determine how a breach occurred. The framework is very frequently updated. The framework does not consider cloud computing, which is quickly becoming increasingly popular for organizations. Provides accreditation for organizations that use this framework. Intentionally left blank. The framework is designed to be implemented alongside other frameworks. Intentionally left blank. NCSC-CAF. The Cyber Assessment Framework opens a new tab. CAF is an extensive framework of 14 principles used to assess the risk of various cyber threats and an organization's defenses against these. The framework applies to organizations considered to perform vitally important services and activities such as critical infrastructure, banking, and the likes. The framework mainly focuses on and assesses the following topics. 1. Data security. 2. System security. 3. Identity and access control. 4. Resiliency. 5. Monitoring. 6. Response and recovery planning. Advantages, disadvantages. This framework is backed by Government Cybersecurity Agency. The framework is still new in the industry, meaning that organizations haven't had much time to make the necessary changes to be suitable for it. This framework provides accreditation. The framework is based on principles and ideas and isn't as direct as having rules like some other frameworks. This framework covers 14 principles which range from security to response. Intentionally left blank. What stage of penetration testing involves using publicly available information? Pentesting fundamentals. There are three primary scopes when testing an application or service. Pentesting fundamentals. There are three primary scopes when testing an application or service. Your understanding of your target will determine the level of testing that you perform in your penetration testing engagement. In this task, we'll cover these three different scopes of testing. Black box testing. This testing process is a high-level process where the tester is not given any information about the inner workings of the application or service. The tester acts as a regular user testing the functionality and interaction of the application or piece of software. This testing can involve interacting with the interface, i.e. buttons, and testing to see whether the intended result is returned. No knowledge of programming or understanding of the program is necessary for this type of testing. Black box testing significantly increases the amount of time spent during the information gathering and enumeration phase to understand the attack surface of the target. Gray box testing. This testing process is the most popular for things such as penetration testing. It is a combination of both black box and white box testing processes. The tester will have some limited knowledge of the internal components of the application or piece of software. Still, it will be interacting with the application as if it were a black box scenario and then using their knowledge of the application to try and resolve issues as they find them. With gray box testing, the limited knowledge given saves time and is often chosen for extremely well-hardened attack surfaces. White box testing. This testing process is a low-level process usually done by a software developer who knows programming and application logic. The tester will be testing the internal components of the application or piece of software and, for example, ensuring that specific functions work correctly and within a reasonable amount of time. The tester will have full knowledge of the application and its expected behavior and is much more time-consuming than black box testing. The full knowledge in a white box testing scenario provides a testing approach that guarantees the entire attack surface can be validated. You are asked to test an application, but are not given access to its source code. What testing process is this? Pentesting fundamentals. Learn the important ethics and ACME has approached you for an assignment. They want you to carry out the stages of a penetration test on their infrastructure. View the site by clicking the green button on this task and follow the guided instructions to complete this exercise. Answer the Let's go through the stages of a penetration test assignment for the ACME company. This stage of the penetration test is where you define 3 primary objectives. Cycle through the tabs below to explore these. Permission, test scope, rules. For a penetration test to be ethical and legal, both parties, the company wanting to test their application for vulnerabilities and the company conducting the pentest, will sign a document giving clear permission for the intended actions. The test scope will define what targets or environments are being tested against. For example, the client may only want you to test part of their application and not their entire network. The rules define the type of behavior a penetration tester will employ. For example, you may only have access to part of the application and not the entire server that hosts it. Two, information gathering. The information gathering stage of an engagement is often undervalued. This stage involves using publicly accessible channels to collect intel on your target. Abby, who has a public profile on LinkedIn, advertises that she works for ACME and even includes her email in her bio, which is a possible way we can target her work laptop and thus the company. Free, enumeration and scanning. The goal of this stage is to get a complete picture of your target. A penetration tester will try to identify user accounts, machines on their network shares, applications, etc. Information gathered from stage 2, and the engagement scope document will help in enumerating your target. The enumeration phase is very important as your findings are used to exploit your target system stage 4. Let's pretend Abby from stage 2 made a post on LinkedIn sharing a blog post she wrote about ACME. From this post, you find ACME web servers IP 96.37.50.151. Try scanning it. Four, exploitation. The exploitation stage involves the knowledge from your enumeration to now identify and exploit vulnerabilities in any of their applications that are in scope. For example, we enumerated ACME website in stage 3 and found that it was vulnerable. We would now exploit this vulnerability, thus ethically hacking ACME website. Exploitation is the use of a vulnerability discovered to gain unauthorized access to an information security system or data. Attacker. The target machine is being attacked using a tool called Metasploit, something you'll learn about on TryHackMe. Post-exploitation. The post-exploitation stage starts when you've gained unauthorized access to a system. At this stage of the engagement, your main goals will be to maintain access to the system and escalate your privileges within the system to a super user or administrator user. Systems are usually set up with normal users that don't have access to various sensitive files and functions. Gaining access to higher privileged users such as administrators will allow you to perform actions that you wouldn't be able to as a normal user, such as reading sensitive files and gaining access to all programs within the system. After doing this, you'll be extracting sensitive information from the system and attacking other components in the environment. For example, if the system is part of a network, you will attempt to gain access to other machines in the network. Six, Pentest report and clearing up. This stage usually occurs at the end of a penetration test. As a penetration tester, you will have to explain the results of your engagement to the client. This is usually done in the form of a report that contains details regarding any security issues you found and how to mitigate them. The client will use this report to understand the security issues and fix the flaws in the technology stack that was tested. It's also best practice to clean up the environment you've been testing where possible. For example, if you were provided access to machines or tooling by the client, you need to delete any artifacts that have been created as a result of testing.